Hello, this is Lord Matthew here, and today we are going to be discussing some Anglo-Saxon history of Britain. Now, this video was made for the purpose of, let's not go to that slide yet, for the purpose of giving some history out to people who don't really understand their own identity and how that came to. Because most people think that England was just formed after the Norman conquest, which I find completely ridiculous, because it was actually formed by King Aethelstan before the Normans came, and there was many Anglo-Saxon kings of England after Aethelstan. It wasn't just Aethelstan, William the Conqueror takes command. That'd be weird and probably a bit ridiculous. So there's also another reason. This is to teach a friend of mine, the One Summoner. You should all check him out. He's a good YouTuber. Because the funny thing is, when I talk to him, he doesn't really know much history about his own country, which is England, and that concerns me. So this is another reason why I'm doing this. Alright, so the Anglo-Saxons really first started coming up around the 6th century. Alright, so the Normans have just left England, or Britannia, and the Brythonic kingdoms, which is a unique word for Britain, or Celts in that case, and the Romans, they were like a combined culture at that point, because they've been under Roman influence for about 600 years. And the Anglo-Saxons came, really, the first known Anglo-Saxons were the brothers Hengist and Horsa, who were invited by the king of Britannia at the time, the first preferable, most people call him the first Bretwalda, which is the overlord of Britain, and his name was Vortigern, and it is known by many sources such as Gildas in the 9th century that he was a terrible ruler and that everybody was unhappy with him. So Vortigern invited these Jutes over, and they agreed to help him out by taking care of the Pictish problems, and they did. But after a problem with the amount of pay they needed to get, the Jutes rebelled against Vortigern and took control of most of eastern Kent, and they were basically virtually opposed as more Anglo-Saxons, as in the Jutes, the Angles and the Saxons, came over and just swept through Britain, until you get the map what you see on the left here, which is the early migration period, and shows you how far they conquered in the first 50 years or so. So, the original Saxon kingdoms was that of Kent, Witwara, which were the Jutish kingdoms, and for the Saxon kingdoms you had the Sussex or South Saxons, Wessex, West Saxons, and Essex, East Saxons. You also had Surrey thrown into the mix, because, you know, why not? In the north was where the Angles mostly settled, if you see the line, the red line. They formed the kingdoms of Bernicia, Deira, East Anglia, and Mercia. And another supposedly first Bretwalda was also the king of Anglia, which was a combination of the East Angles, the East Saxons, Jutes, and South Saxons. They all combined. But after, his name was Aela. After his death, it's fragmented into those kingdoms, because they revolted against his sons and so on. Now, as you can see, the Saxons were virtually unopposed in the first 50 years or so, until they were stopped by King Arthur, which was mainly a legend, but there was a person called Ambronicus who led the defence of the Britons, and he is the namesake of Arthur. Unfortunately, there was no actual Arthur. That'd be crazy. Alright, let's move on. Alright, so after a couple hundred years, the main kingdom started to form up and absorb the other ones around it. Northumbria was formed from the kingdom of Bernicia and Deira, when Darius' last king was killed by the Bernician king. Mercia absorbed the kingdom of Lindsey and pushed completely westward, annihilating the Brythonic kingdoms. East Anglia stayed pretty much the same, and Wessex absorbs Surrey and later Sussex and Kent under the Kingdom of Wessex. Now, this period of history is called the Mercian Supremacy, or the Heptarchy. It's called the Mercian Supremacy because Mercia was the main ruler here, and the last pagan king of Mercia was called Penda, and he was killed in battle after a fight with the Northumbrian king. Also, it's called Heptarchy because there were 7 main Saxon kingdoms: the kingdom of East Anglia, Kent, Mercia, Northumbria, which was split into Bernicia and Deira. It was conjunction to the type of king at the time, Sussex and Wessex. Now that all changed when, in the year 864, the Great Heathen Army, under the command of supposedly Ragnar the Lodbrok's sons, came to East Anglia and tried to fight with King Eadred. He's now called the Martyr, but to avoid fighting them, Eadred gave horses and supplies to the army, and they moved to Northumbria, and they took York. Now, this is the most interesting. The Northumbrian Saxons at the time was in a civil war between Aella and Osbert. Now, because of this invasion, they united forces and marched on York, which was called Eberacum at the time, and they got absolutely massacred. Right? And Osbert died in battle, but Aella was caught running away from the battlefield, and according to legend, the sons of Ragnar gave him the Blood Eagle in revenge for him killing Ragnar Lodbrok. Now, by the 10th century, the Norsemen owned most of Britain. They had taken over the kingdoms of Northumbria and established a puppet state in the north. They'd taken over most of Mercia and East Anglia. But they were stopped in Wessex at the Battle of Efferdam by King Alfred of Wessex, which you might know later as King Alfred the Great. Now, as you can see by this map, how can the English have a hope in hell, right? Well, you see, by that, the Norse armies were mostly a loose confederation rather than a united force like Alfred's Wessex, because Northumbria, East Anglia and Mercia still acted as separate kingdoms, and in the northeast of Mercia it was referred to as the 5 boroughs because it was just 5 major towns that owned sway of the land. They were separate as well. So basically what you have is Wessex at the south, led on by King Alfred. You have Danish East Anglia, led by Guthrum, who was the guy who lost at Efferdam. And then in the north you had the Danish kingdoms of Northumbria and York. And you had the 5 boroughs in east, and you have the English Mercia, which is more like a puppet state of Wessex at the time, but supposedly still sovereign. Now, the North also came in and attacked most of Scotland and settled in Ireland, in Dublin, which became a thriving town of trade. They took the Isle of Man, and over time Wessex became strong enough, and they started pushing outwards again. By 930s, they had taken, under King Edward, Alfred's son, they had taken all of East Anglia back, and the 5 boroughs were also gone, and the only kingdom of the Danes left was Northumbria, and they pushed on and took that out under King Æthelstan, and they formed the Kingdom of England, and he was the last Bretwalda because he owned sovereignty of all the British Isles, because they submitted to him. All the Welsh kingdoms submitted to him, and so did Scotland and Alba. Ireland is just Ireland, so no one really cared. And basically what you've got up to this point is a bunch of Anglo-Saxon kings. In 1015 King Canute, or Canute the Great, invaded England, and he took all of England and became the first proper Danish king of England. He ruled the North Sea Empire, which was Norway, Denmark and England combined. Now, he lost the throne and he died. So he lost the throne. It was handed to his son Half-Canute, but that was later given up to Edward because Half-Canute was never in England and it was just given to Edward. And then you had Edward the Confessor ruling. He was, by all means, a good king. He was pious, and he only had a few scuffles with the local earls. Now, the earls were main conglomerates of the kingdom. You had major earldoms. You had the earldoms of Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex and Kent. These were the major kingdoms previously, so they ruled as separate bodies, basically, under one king, Edward. And they hold a lot of sway in the land. So when Earl Godwin was exiled for not following the king's orders, the king had to get the support of the earls of Northumbria and Mercia to kick him out. But later on, he arrived with an army next to London, and he got his titles back, and his sons got titles as well. One of his sons, Harold Godwinson, which is surprisingly the son of Godwin, he was basically coming up saying, "Hey bro, my king, hey, so you want to like give my brothers earls? If you don't, I might murder you." So that was basically, in a nutshell, their relationship. So basically, Harold's brother Tostig got the earldom of Northumbria, and that his other two brothers, Theophilic and a guy I don't care about, got the earldoms of Kent and East Anglia, while Harold got himself the dukedom of Wessex. Now, rolling into 1066, Edward the Confessor gets ill and dies. Now, this is the problem, for Edward didn't have any kids, but he promised the throne to like everyone. I'm not even kidding. Alright, first of all, he promised the throne to William of Normandy, and he was all chummy about it, like, "Oh yeah, thanks bro." So at the end, on his deathbed, supposedly Harold Godwinson heard the king say that he was to be the next king, and William disputed that claim immediately after Harold was crowned, which was a day later, which was against the traditional mourning period of about 6 months of a king. Now, so William gathered an invasion fleet and got the blessing of the Pope, and he started preparations for an invasion. While in the north, Harald Hardrada, he was the king of Denmark and Norway, basically came up and said that the previous owner of Norway's like brother, was the king of England, and he was promised the throne of England after his one's death. So Harold claimed that it was his right to inherit as well. So he came down while William was still preparing and the wind was blocking him. Harold came down and fought 2 English earls, Morcar and Edwin, at the Battle of Fulford. Now, at Fulford, Harold Hardrada just annihilated the English forces by exploiting a river and stream, and he flanked around the English forces and cut them to pieces. Now, when Harold Godwinson heard about this, yeah, I know, a lot of Harold, right? When Harold Godwinson heard of this, he marched up north and he attacked Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. Now, Harold, oh for fuck's sake, yeah, I'm just going to use the North. I'm going to say Northman. Yeah, using the Norseman. I can't keep saying Harold. It's ridiculous. All right. So the Norsemen were waiting for hostages at the time. So they left their armours on their ships, and they didn't have that many men there. So it was a complete surprise when Harold Godwinson's men came up to them and they attacked them. Now, it's a legend saying that a lone berserker warrior held the English at bay while the Norsemen built a shield wall. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it could possibly be true. And that was ended when and English soldiers went under the bridge in a barrel and prodded him up the arse with a spear. Now, since he was gone, the Norsemen now, totally unprepared because they didn't have any armour on, they had their shield wall ready, and it was a grueling battle. But Harold Hardrada was shot in the throat, and he was dead, and Tostig was also cut down. Now, after that had happened, the Norsemen up from Rigsey came up from their boats, and they were just there to see Harold's death, and they attacked, but it was not to be, and the Norsemen were killed and knocked off. Of the over 200 ships that took the army to England, only 27 were needed to ferry them back. Now, as this was going on, William had started to invade England. He landed at Pevensey and moved up to Hastings, which was a ridge overlooking trees and forests on either side, and he formed up there. Harold heard of this and came rushing down again in another breathtaking march, and they clashed on the 14th of October at Hastings. And William won the battle due to decisive tactics such as attacking then retreating to draw out the enemy from their shield wall. Now after this, it was a clear cut, and the Anglo-Saxons crowned another king, Edgar, but he was not a match, and they surrendered at Berwickhamsted at the end of 1066. Now, the Northern revolts were the last bit of Saxon resistance, because the Southerners were complete and utter whitewashers and they didn't do anything right. It's not right. Alright, so the first Saxon revolt was led by the Earls Edwin and Morcar after they had escaped from prison. That basically ended pretty swiftly, and they were forgiven, but they were kept in hostage. They escaped again, and they enlisted the help of the Danish, and the Anglo-Saxon Danish army attacked York, and they took York, but then the Danes buggered off with a bunch of treasure, and the Anglo-Saxons were squashed again. Now, to stop the Normans from revolting, to stop the Saxons from revolting again, sorry I said Normans, William basically just burnt everything. He went around the countryside, killing and burning and sowing the fields with salt, so most of the population died, and some of the population needs to still be recovered from its pre-1066 population recording. And that is basically the end of the Anglo-Saxon resistance and the beginning of the Normans in England. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you've learnt something, and hope you enjoy this new style of video. If you don't, post in the comments and give me suggestions what else to do. If you just prefer gaming, then I'm up for that, but this seemed an interesting idea. So, see you, and I bid you adieu.